They've never made headlines. You won't find them in museums next to Spitfires or steam engines. But without these machines, Britain wouldn't stand. Buried in quarries, deep in pits, they moved mountains, literally. Hand-built Scammells, imported Euclids, V12-powered beasts that thundered through gravel, coal, and clay. They didn't drive on roads, they built them, and now they're almost gone. This is the story of the forgotten giants that carried Britain through its post-war rebirth. And if you haven't yet, hit subscribe, the biggest machines are still to come. In the decades after World War II, Britain faced a monumental challenge: rebuild a nation bombed into rubble. New motorways, factories, housing estates all required massive quantities of aggregate, coal, limestone, and clay. Local quarries expanded rapidly to meet this demand, but the equipment on hand, Bedford TKs, Leyland Comets, and AEC road tippers, simply couldn't carry enough material fast enough. They were designed for highways, not haul roads carved through rock faces. What Britain needed wasn't a truck, it needed a new breed of machine. Low-geared, off-road titans capable of hauling 50, 100, even 150 tons over unforgiving terrain. And in many cases, they didn't exist yet. So Britain looked inward and outward. Few machines embody British industrial muscle like the Scaml Contractor. Designed in the 1960s for both oilfield and quarry use, it became a go-to hauler in some of Britain's toughest work sites. Equipped with a Cummins NHC 250 14-litre diesel engine producing around 305 horsepower and over 900 pounds per foot of torque, the Contractor could move over 100 tons when configured for semi-trailer operation. Its rugged 6x4 or 6x6 driveline, leaf-sprung suspension and modular steel frame made it a beast on loose stone and steep grades. Many featured planetary hub reduction axles, ideal for slow, controlled movement with massive payloads. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't quick, but it was unstoppable. In quarries from Derbyshire to Devon, contractors outlived the pits they worked in. Watford built and field service with nothing more than a wrench and a crowbar, the Contractor became a cult hero to drivers and mechanics alike. When Scammell relied on heritage and brute strength, Foden took a different approach: purpose-built innovation. The Foden dump truck, introduced in the 1960s, was one of Britain's first truly dedicated off-road quarry haulers. Unlike adapted highway lorries, this was built from scratch for pit duty. Early models used Detroit diesel 8V71 engines, two-stroke V8s producing up to 318 horsepower. Later units swapped in Cummins NTC series diesels. Paired with Allison automatic transmissions or 10-speed manuals, they had serious off-road capability. The design was pure function: a square cab for visibility, heavy-duty bogies, and a short wheelbase for maneuverability in tight corners. Capable of 40-ton payloads, they weren't as big as Euclids, but far more agile on narrow British quarry floors. Operators valued them for their balance of simplicity and strength, and in an era when every pit had its own approach roads, that mattered more than top speed. Before purpose-built quarry trucks, there were battlefield brutes, none more famous than the Thornycroft mighty Antar. Originally developed in the late 1940s for the Ministry of Supply as a tank transporter, the Antar was overbuilt in every way. Its 18-litre Rolls-Royce Meteor engine, a V12 derivative of the Spitfire's Merlin, delivered 240 to 355 horsepower depending on the version, along with relentless torque. Quarry contractors in the 1950s repurposed these war machines for off-road heavy haulage. Fitted with flatbeds or drawbar trailers, they hauled massive shovels, crushers, and raw aggregate out of pits where nothing else could cope. Its ladder-frame chassis, vacuum-assisted steering, and multi-speed transfer cases made it slow but invincible. Though eventually phased out in the 1970s, the Antar laid the groundwork for British-built haulage lorries that could survive in punishing, off-tarmac environments. The AEC Mammoth Major wasn't a pure quarry rig, but it served as a transitional giant. Originally introduced in the 1930s and refined post-war, the Mammoth Major Mark V featured 6x4 axles, twin steer setups, and Leyland 0.680 diesel engines rated around 200 horsepower. Though technically road legal, many were adapted with reinforced springs and steel bodies for short quarry-to-plant runs. In smaller limestone and chalk pits, where full off-roaders weren't viable, the Mammoth bridged the gap. Though phased out by the 1970s, its influence lingered in Britain's obsession with multi-axle configurations for mixed terrain use. As British manufacturers built tough, medium-scale lorries, the Americans were shipping in monsters. The most iconic name? Euclid. Founded in Ohio and acquired by General Motors in 1953. The Euclid R15, introduced in the 1950s, carried 20 to 25 tons, already double most British tipper limits, but it was only the beginning. The R22, R35 and R50 pushed things even further, with payloads exceeding 50 and even 85 tons. These rigid dumpers came with twin-disc torque converters, electric retarder braking, and massive petrol or diesel engines like the GM 671 or 12V71 Detroit diesel, many of them two-strokes, producing that signature banshee howl under load. In 1968, the Euclid off-road division was rebranded as Terex, also under GM. The machines only grew from there. Terex's 33 series models like the 3307, 3311, and 3315 became legends in open cast mining and quarrying. Some Terex 3315s had payload ratings up to 150 tons and were powered by twin 1500 horsepower Detroit diesels with electric drive, effectively making them mobile locomotives. They were not nimble, they were not cheap, but for super quarries in Leicestershire, Cumbria, and Fife, they were indispensable. While Euclid dominated early imports, Wabco, originally an American brand with Canadian operations, offered a simpler, highly durable alternative, the Wabco Haul Pack 85C. Widely used in British mineral sites in the 1970s and 80s, carried around 72 tons and used Caterpillar or Cummins engines. Their mechanical simplicity made them easy to service, and parts availability was strong across the Commonwealth. Wabco's philosophy was less about pushing extremes and more about building consistent workhorses. Their trucks found homes in deeper pits and were often maintained on site by quarry teams without factory support. By the late 80s, Wabco's truck business had been absorbed into Komatsu, and their presence faded, but not before leaving a serious impression on British industry. By the late 1980s and 1990s, German engineering gained ground in British quarries. Liebherr, long respected for cranes and excavators, began supplying TA-series articulated haulers and T-series rigid trucks to UK quarries. Powered by MAN or Mercedes-Benz diesels, these rigs featured electronically monitored transmissions and modern brake systems. Another contender was Lectra Hall, originally American but later owned by Germany's IBH Group. The Lectra Hall 85F, powered by 1200 plus horsepower Cummins KT 2300 engines, appeared in high production coal pits like Tower Collier in South Wales. While not as widespread as Euclid or Terex, these German machines aligned with stricter emission standards, offering cleaner operation, better visibility, and improved safety features. In some cases, it was the environmental regulations, not the payload, that determined who stayed in the quarry. Operating a quarry titan was no ordinary job. Climbing up into the cab was often a 5-rung ladder affair. Visibility was limited. The seats had no suspension, and the brakes, often air or oil-cooled drums, demanded early planning and nerves of steel. In rain, sleet, or 30-degree heat, drivers would run trip after trip. One Scammell driver in Derbyshire recalled doing over 100 loads a day, each run carefully timed to avoid overloading the primary crusher. Fuel economy wasn't a concern. Some Detroit diesels got just 2 miles per gallon, but uptime was king. Breakdowns were handled on the floor, a worn-out U-joint, a busted seal, a cracked spring, all fixed with heat, sweat, and welding torches. These drivers knew their machines inside out. You didn't just operate a Titan, you bonded with it. By the late 1990s, the era of the Titans was coming to an end. 3 forces brought the curtains down. 1. EU legislation. Emissions laws, safety rules, and noise limits made many legacy rigs unviable. 2. Operational efficiency. Articulated dump trucks or ADTs from Volvo, Bell, and Caterpillar were lighter, faster, and easier to maintain. 3. Industry consolidation. Big companies like Tarmac and Lafarge streamlined fleets around global OEMs. Spare parts for Scammell or Foden were hard to find. Euclid had long become Terex, then Wabco under Volvo Group. Many of the old rigid Titans were too large to move, too expensive to restore, and ultimately, scrapped on site. It wasn't failure. It was progress, but it came with a cost. Today, a few quarry titans survive, barely. A Scaml Contractor might be found at a vintage haulage rally, lovingly restored with hand-cut body panels. The British Commercial Vehicle Museum in Leyland has preserved examples of Thornycroft, Foden, and AEC heavy haulers. But most are gone. There are no brand clubs for Foden dump trucks, no glossy books about the Euclid R35, just grainy photos, fading stories, and a few oil-stained gloves at the back of a retired driver's shed. They weren't built for speed, they weren't built for comfort, they were built to move mountains, one thunderous load at a time. From Scammell to Terex, Foden to Euclid, these machines carved the bones of Britain and left behind more than just tyre tracks. They left behind a legacy. Today, they're mostly silent, scrapped, forgotten, or resting in corners of old quarries. But for a few decades, they were unstoppable, and if we don't remember them, no one will. So if you've ever driven one, fixed one, or just admired these beasts from afar, drop your story in the comments. Let's keep their memory alive. Hit like if you think these titans deserve their place in history. Subscribe for more forgotten machines, buried stories, and unsung legends of British industry. And share this with someone who still remembers the sound of a Detroit diesel echoing off quarry walls. They weren't just machines, they were titans. And titans never die quietly.